False friends. Are they your enemy? What are they? Can they help you? How do we learn to spot them? I'm not talking about false friends in the real world. That's a problem of its own. What I'm talking about today is what are called false friends in language study or across and between languages. There are kind of at least two approaches you can take to the issue of false friends. One is the shallow and one is the deep approach. You can just memorize them as you encounter them, or you can dive deeper. And I guess both of those are useful in their own different way. But first of all, let's actually find out what we mean by false friends. You may have come across this already if you've been studying foreign languages. It's where you have a word that strongly resembles a word in another language you're learning, but has a completely or partly different meaning. You can have a partial false friend, but today I'm largely focusing on the complete false friends. I'm not going to make a simple list of them because there are many dictionaries of false friends online and in print that you can look up. The term itself seems to have come from a book published in the early 20th century designed for translators, written in French and talking about the English and the way that English language is full of false friends for French speakers and French translators. And of course that makes sense because those two languages have a lot of ancestry in common, a lot of loanwords between the two and mutual influence. We're going to look at the way in which words that are either homophones or homonyms that sound or look the same between languages can mislead you. Sometimes they can even back influence the other language, so they may have a different meaning, and then the influence of that language on the first language is so strong that in fact it takes on the other language's meaning. We'll look at an example of that later on, but one would be, for instance, the word opportunity. Normally in French you would say occasion for opportunity. There is a word opportunité, but it means when something is opportune. But people who speak French are sometimes starting to use the English sense of that word too. So language is like this. It shifts and sways around the edges, and slippage isn't entirely a bad thing. It's just something that you need to know about so that you don't use the wrong word. Now I'm going to look at a very few, 3 that are well known, and a 4th that is maybe less so, that you might not come across so often because it's more euphemistic and more perhaps used in rarer circumstances, but still good to know because you can be very embarrassed if you use these words wrongly. The English word bless and the French word blesser. Completely distinct words. The English word bless is actually said to have no cognates in other languages. The OED and Etym Online, which is a very useful website if you ever want to check the etymology of a word to help you understand its journey down through time and where it is today. OED and Etym Online both tell me that bless in English comes from the Old English, which I will mispronounce for sure, but there's no one around speaking it to tell me how, bletzian, which comes from a word meaning to hallow with blood, like sprinkling blood on an altar. So there's something a bit creepy about that word. Etym Online says that in late Old English it took on some of the meaning of the word bliss. You can see how that would happen, bless and bliss. So from that we get an idea that it's making someone happy or making them prosper, making them fortunate, blessing them. What about in French? Blesser. Very similar looking. The French one comes from the Old French blessier, to injure or hurt, and the modern French word means that. So it's not being blessed, it's being hurt. So even though it looks like it's a member of the same family, it has quite a different usage and meaning. You wouldn't want to say to someone, I'm wounded or injured, when you meant I'm blessed, if you're prone to saying that kind of thing. Even though injury and the blood sprinkling on the altar idea may seem to have a family resemblance, the two words are actually completely separate. So if you want to say bless in French, as in someone being blessed or blessing someone, what do you use instead? The verb bénir is used. Bénir, that's in the infinitive. The adjective blessed might also be found as bienheureux or bienheureuse in the feminine, which is more a religious context. And I remember the first time I came across that in a mysterious form was with the letters BSE, meaning bienheureuse, on the plaque, as we say in Australia. I think the British say plaque, on the plaque inside Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris. The Bienheureuse Vierge Marie, the Blessed Virgin Mary. So if you're prone to that kind of vocabulary, you might like to recognize that blessed or blessed can also be bienheureux or bienheureuse. But the verb generally is bénir. You might say someone is béni, blessed, but the main thing is don't say blessé if you mean blessed. The second false friend I'm going to look at in more depth today. We talked about shallow approach, where you just learn them and say don't use that word, and deeper approach, where you're actually going to look at why it is and what the origin of the difference might be. The second one I'm going to look at is actual and actually, so inherently connected, the adjective and the adverb, which can be actuel, actuellement in French, and also is similar in many other languages. So in Spanish you have actualidad, and in Italian attualità. Outside of English, this word tends to be referring to something being current. So it's a time thing. It's not talking about the reality status as it is in English. It's talking about how up to the minute or how happening now something is. It therefore causes many English speakers to stumble in other European languages. In German also there's aktuell. So English used to have this meaning, where actual meant current, but it's long gone, it's obsolete now. Dare I say, it's not actuel anymore. Likewise, Wiktionary does actually tell us online that there's a rare usage in French of actuellement to mean in actuality, but you won't find that in everyday usage. So there's a sense in which a false friend isn't necessarily 100% false. There might be a little bit of friendship in there, a residue of similarity in these words that have descended from at least the Latin in this case, but almost all the time we must accept that they don't overlap. So in actuality, English now uses actual to mean something that is a fact. What is a fact in contrast with something that is not so? Example, he thinks she is a teacher, but she's actually a writer. If in those other languages you said someone was actually, actuellement, attualmente, a writer, it would mean they were currently a writer. If they said these are the actual rules in those languages, it would mean these are the rules at the moment, these are the current rules. As opposed to in English, where it would mean the real rules, maybe as opposed to the imaginary rules. In addition to that, actually in English is often used as a kind of nearly meaningless filler word that we actually use all the time, actually. Have these false friends confused you yet? Eventually. Eventual and eventually. This one is also commonly stumbled on because of having quite distinct meaning in English from in other European languages. Again, the possibility for a bad mistake that might offend. So it's not about simply being correct, it's about making sure you don't get misunderstood. In English, eventually means either gradually or in the end. So we'll eventually get there. We'll eventually learn all these false friends. In the end, something will happen. In French, éventuellement, it means possibly or potentially. So it might be very different from the fact that it is one day or at one time going to happen. Think about that for a moment and the problems it could cause if you didn't know. Now, this is the case with other languages than French as well. Apparently in Quebec French, the word has taken on the English meaning. But it's really important to know the difference because not everyone's speaking Quebec French. And imagine some of the circumstances where you could say one meaning the other. You will eventually be given this job. You will possibly or potentially be given this job. They're two very different meanings, aren't they? That's one to be aware of. Don't be fooled by the apparent family resemblance of words like eventually and éventuellement. If you actually want to say eventually in French, see what I did there? you might need to use finalement, or an expression like à la longue, which is more the meaning of eventually in English, finalement or à la longue, and other possibilities also. But last of all, there are more unusual false friends you might find, like the verb trépasser. I was once, long ago, in a literary translation group where every single one of us English speakers, despite having enough of a level of French to be in the translation group in the first place, actually read this word in a poem as trespass. That's a forgivable mistake, isn't it? It's understandable. You get used to the idea that that accented E in French might mean there was an S there in the Latin, and so you put 2 and 2 together and get 22. In fact, the English word does come from Old French and does have the sense of passing or crossing through where you shouldn't. Okay, so trespassing, not just in the physical sense of trespassing on a property or a place where you shouldn't be, but also the sense of doing wrong to someone, doing something that you shouldn't, as in those who trespass against us, to go back to religious terminology. But the French word, as it has journeyed on down through time, has chosen to take on a different meaning. It's a different kind of crossing over, passing across, which means to die or to pass away. You can see why, even though this one doesn't come up as often as maybe actually or eventually, it's still really important to know that trépasser means to pass away. It very much has that pass or pass away feeling of slightly genteel euphemism rather than just saying die. It's more like saying deceased than saying dead, for instance. These are only a few of the false friends that I've encountered, largely between English and French, but also other languages. Why don't you share with me some that you think people ought to know? Put them in the comments down below and we'll discuss them. And whether you've taken the shallow route with them of just memorizing, okay, I mustn't use that word in this circumstance, or whether you've done a bit of a deeper dive to find out how come those two words that look so similar are actually so different. Because there's a lot to be learned from looking into the reason for the divergence of words across time.